Hi, everybody. Welcome, Sinclair. Welcome, Herb. Welcome, Elaine and Michael and David and Victoria and Vicky and everyone is joining. So exciting. Everyone is coming to say happy birthday to Danny, the queen of the cocktail shaker. Happy birthday, Danny.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind wishes. Thank you. And thank you for the hearts. And thank you for my present. So my present to myself was I didn't put out a cocktail recipe today. Not only that, I didn't even make a cocktail because here's my water, because I had alcohol at
Because she's
lunch.
already drunk, maybe.
Not quite drunk, but aspirational for sure. And I will put out, when we put out this video later on, I will put out the recipe for my signature cocktail. And if one of you emails
The Danny.
says that sounds like a Moscow Mule, I will kill you.
It's called the Danny.
It's
when I go to Danny's house, I'll just say, when I go to Danny's house, we usually have some wine, but first, we're not like lushes. We just like a cocktail. I have to say that. But anyway, she'll say, would you like a Danny? So a Danny just means that she's going to make a concoction and it's really yummy. But there is an original Danny. Go.
There is. It's 1/3 grapefruit juice, 1/3 Saint-Germain, which is elderflower liqueur. No substitutes accepted. Only use Saint-Germain, Saint-Germain, whatever you want to call it. And then 2 ounces of, well, that's how I make it for 2 people. And then 1/3 vodka. And our friends, I won't say their name because their last name is famous, but friends of ours actually texted me when I was away last time. And they were like, what's the recipe for the Danny? And then came back to me and said, we have bought out our local liquor store in Kiowa. They no longer have any more Saint-Germain. So this is really good. Put in a little bit of squeeze of lime, shaky in your shaky thing, and then pour it up in a cosmopolitan.
Everyone needs their own Yeti custom-made shaker. Danny has one. I have one. Yes, Catherine Valentine. It is Danny's birthday today.
Thank you very much. Anyway, so that's the story. But okay, I realized that we could talk about me for the next half an hour.
Yeah,
and by the way, I'm not wearing a bathing suit. I showed Elise. I'm wearing a pretty dress. See, I'm all dressed up.
She got it at Zara. I'm thinking of going there after this to get it. Anyway, it looks very nice. We starting with some bad news today. That horrible plane crash in India. I think it's the worst plane crash maybe they've in the history. I think it's worth.
There was so much worse. As you know, Elise, I'm paranoid about this and used to be very afraid of flying. So, no, the worst plane crash was the collision of 2 jumbo jets on Tenerife many years ago.
But this was bad, and over 200 people killed, and it's
at least 50 on the ground, probably at least 250 on the plane. It was a Boeing Dreamliner. This is the first time we've had a Boeing Dreamliner crash. As some of you know, and as Elise knows, our son is a pilot with United. So he called me for my birthday, and I said, enough about my birthday. Let's talk about what happened. He explained, for those of you who are interested, and most people are interested in such things, basically it looked like a catastrophic loss of lift, of hydraulic power, right? So it's taking off, and then it just remains in that position. They don't even get the landing gear up, and they just plummet right down, whether it was a loss of power or a bird strike, either way, but so sad for that community and for the UK where so many of the people were from. So that sucked. Bad way to start the day, and we're really sorry for that. Elise, you have opinions about LA. We don't agree. Go, baby.
We don't agree. Listen, I'll just, I feel like it's like ridiculous that we even have to stipulate that any violent protesters should be arrested. Okay, that's it. I mean, I'm not, I do think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, there was only one car. There were only this. Some of the protests were violent. It was wrong. There were instigators. However, what I think happened, as this president of ours is wont to do, that he takes something and makes it even worse. And my personal feeling is going to a Home Depot and rounding up whoever you can get And I think also we've talked about a lot of people. And, today you're singing a different tune a little bit, my love, because last week I think we were talking about immigration and we were both saying that we have to deal with the immigration issue. And most Americans feel that we should deal with the immigration issue. I don't think the way it was done, rounding up like whoever you could grab, some of the American citizens, one was a pregnant woman, um, should be done that way. And that's what I think the protests were about. Yes, and then the president said, "Oh, well, they're violent. I'm going to put the military on there," which exacerbated the situation. And now, I was thinking of, and I might write about this. Remember that movie, Our Brand is Crisis?
Oh, I do. I never saw it, but I do
I
remember.
think
And yeah,
that's this president. He thrives on crisis, and then that's a justification for a lot more, heavy-handed tactics. So,
so
yep.
2 things.
Okay.
First of all, I haven't changed my tune. Guess what? You don't get to be an illegal alien in a Home Depot any more than you get to be an illegal alien at a Chick-fil-A or a Strawberry Farm. If you're an illegal alien, you are an illegal alien, and you can be and should be arrested and deported wherever you are. But I totally agree with you that the president really does thrive on crisis, and that he absolutely is one who seeks to pour oil on burning flames. Jonah Goldberg had a really good piece in the LA Times where he has a
My
column.
work crush, I love me some Jonah Goldberg.
He's listen, Jonah is I think, is one of the smartest guys around and extraordinarily thoughtful, and, he's a conservative like I am,
At
but
the
I think that
Dispatch.
he think at the right, he is with Steve Hayes, the founder of the Dispatch, but I think he wrote about this very well, and I think your sort of, meme, "My brand is crisis," he said, "This president loves war. This president not doesn't wanna go to war, but he wants to be a wartime president without a war." This is a very this is a little bit that article that I love that you wrote about Ukraine. This is the conundrum for Donald Trump, right? Is that he wants to do that. Now, when you are confronted with law enforcement, whether it is the military or it is the National Guard, whoever the hell it is, my first instinct is not to be violent. So I don't accept the notion that there was a cycle of violence here. I think this is a problem. Look, at the end of the day, what you want to see is it is a little bit cosplay, you're right, Lana. What you want to see is you want to see that there is an organized way to deal with this. You don't want it to be arrest porn, and
Right.
I don't
And
like
don't
that.
forget, he said he was gonna start by going after the criminals, the violent rapists, murderers, and yes, okay, they found one of them. But what I'm
No, they
saying
didn't
is
just find one of them, they found more of them,
that's
and,
not what they were. Okay, look, they were just grabbing anyone in that parking lot that looked like, named Jose. I'm sorry. That was what they were doing. And then, now he even has to backtrack a little bit because there's a lot of complaints from from small businesses and from farmers. And he said today, yes, he did. I
I
can
know he
Google it.
did. I know he did, but just think about the outrage of this, right? Oh, I'm going to crack down on the illegals who came in under Joe Biden. Okay, he closed the border. Good job. And he made a liar of Joe Biden who said he couldn't do it without legislation. That's great. Good job, Donald Trump. Now he's rounding people up. We don't like the way he's doing it, but he's doing it, and probably he's doing it within the law. On the other hand, to then turn around and say, I believe in rule of law. Oh, except, if it's hurting Walmart or it's hurting, my friend Farmer Joe,
Okay,
that
there's
is
hypocrisy there.
bullshit. And so you and
But
I
what
agree about
okay,
that.
but let's move on to this idea of, politicizing the military. What happened at Fort Bragg, and just for anybody that was under a rock the other day and didn't see,
Hey.
and we'll get to Iraq in a minute. But we are really between a rock and a hard place right now. Um,
Stop her before she puns again.
I could go all
Tell
day.
us what happened at
I'll be
Fort
here
Bragg.
all day. Basically, President Trump went to talk to troops at Fort Bragg. And it was a very political speech. It was, going off on Gavin Newsom and Biden and, Democrats. And first of all, I think he went too far. I think it was a politically charged speech to uniformed soldiers. There was pro-Trump merchandise being sold. which now the Army is looking into. And a lot of the troops, we know he's very popular in the rank and file. They were booing Democrats. They were booing the president. There was definitely, I had Barbara Starr on yesterday, and she said that was like really unprofessional for troops. But the whole idea is that this president is politicizing the military, and it's inappropriate. And that's what the concern is. Wait,
Can I put up 3 fingers?
yes.
Go ahead. No, say it.
No,
That's
the
what the
the
concern
concern is that, now he's deploying, troops to a lot of blue cities, as they're called. And there's a concern that, it's a combination of creating a crisis, fanning out the military. He said, I'm gonna send the military after the anarchists. And, I'm not against deploying the National Guard if it's really needed.
Right, and I
Um,
think it was needed.
I don't think so.
That's why the dumbass mayor of Los Angeles finally declared a curfew after telling us there was no problem. Then why did you declare a curfew? All right, let's get off this. I agree with you about Fort Bragg. I don't like it. I didn't like it when Barack Obama did it,
Me neither.
And he didn't sell merch. I don't like it when that happens. I don't think it's the right approach. I think it is an abuse of power when you do that kind of thing, and it does make people question our military in ways that I never want to see, because those guys, we have an all-volunteer military in this country. Those men and women are the greatest. They defend our freedoms,
And it's
and
putting them
I
in a
don't want
bad
anybody.
position. They don't want to go after Americans.
Right. So, no, that's not what I'm arguing about. I'm talking about Fort Bragg. Deploying the military to California is well within the rights of the president. I have a boring quote for you that I set aside from the Constitutional Convention, which I will now spare our people because I really want to get in time to talk about what was the big news of yesterday. Right? What happened? Both the State Department and the military notified our embassies and our bases within range of Iran. So throughout the
So we're
Gulf,
Baghdad,
and in
Kuwait,
Iraq.
and Bahrain.
Yeah, that dependents and unnecessary folks could be evacuated. This sounded like a prelude to something happening. Then we had General Kurilla, who is the commandant of CENTCOM. The command within the military whose AOR area of responsibility is the Middle East, canceled testimony this morning before the Armed Services Committee. So that was another issue. Then it looked like Hapless Steve Witkoff's dialogue with the Iranians this weekend was going to be canceled, but now I hear it's back on. But all of the leaks out of the administration are suggesting that there's an impending Israeli strike on Iran. And I don't know.
How do you feel about that?
I have no inside information for anybody, unfortunately.
How do you feel about that?
My Zio decoder ring did not tell me what to think. How do I feel about that? Israel needs to bomb Iran. I have long believed that. I thought that they should have done it when Iran had a baby program. Iran now has, first of all, we saw this morning the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, in this morning's meeting for the first time in 20 years, censured that country, Iran, for violations of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, violations of its safeguards agreement,
Failing to answer questions about past military activity. It's the first resolution in 20 years.
Yep, exactly. So this is a prelude to some stronger action, I suspect, within the UN Security Council by our European friends. But, we are now in the weird position, the weird bizarro world position in which Donald Trump is saying we have to use diplomacy, in which they're leaning on the Israelis not to strike the Iranians, even as the Iranians are reconstituting not simply their nuclear weapons program, but their missile program. And, I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. What do you think?
Also, apparently Steve Witkoff is sounding the bell that U.S. fears Iran's Barak Ravid has a piece out. U.S. Barak Ravid is with Axios.
Barak Ravid had a false report out last week, and I suspect this one is about as
well.
About
It's
the same quality.
Look, whether they're false or not, they're certainly like leaked for effect, and he's kind of a little bit, the mouthpiece of the administration at this point. U.S. fears Iran's response to Israeli strike would be mass casualty event. Who wrote that
Garbage.
headline? Steve Witkoff?
No, so
White
wait a
House
minute.
Operative
Let's just
Steve
talk.
Witkoff privately warned Senate Republicans last week that Iran could unleash a mass casualty response. Now, Iran might not be able to mass casualty response against Israel, but why did the U.S. take out its troops from Bahrain, Kuwait, Baghdad? Why,
Dependence.
Danny?
Okay. Dependence, not its troops.
Why?
That's why? Because Iran just today directly threatened U.S. troops in the region. And we have seen, for example, in the aftermath of the Qasem Soleimani strike in Trump's first term, we saw that they hit a base where U.S. troops are in northern Iraq, and they did give some of our troops traumatic brain injuries, concussions, in other words. So that is a reason why you don't want to have innocent
What
people.
they're worried about is if Israel strikes Iran, Iran's going to maybe strike back at Israel, but also strike back at the U.S. and the UAE and Saudi and everyone's.
Let's just stop for a second, okay, Elise? And you're about to, the litany I'm about to recite. So this is for our listeners, our kind observers. Israel hit Iran twice in the course of this war that is ongoing with Hamas after Iranian strikes. What happened? Iran was incapable of executing a serious retaliation in both cases, injuring in the first case a Bedouin child who did not die, and in the second case, a falling missile casing hit a Portsmouth Palace.
My point. Okay.
Let me finish. I've still got my finger up.
I have 2 fingers.
Screw your fingers. 1 second. But we can go further, right? The Israelis hit them directly. There was no retaliation. When we took out Qasem Soleimani, their retaliation against us was pathetic. The reality is Iran is not the great power that people think it is. What will make it a true danger? If it has nuclear weapons. And I want to go further than that, because the Obama administration repeatedly told us we can't strike Syria because, and stop the war on the Syrian people that resulted in 500,000 dead, because we won't be able to tolerate the retaliation. He was blowing smoke out of his ass, and Barak Rabin is blowing smoke out of his ass about a mass casualty event as well. That's garbage.
Is Trump or Witkoff and Trump blowing smoke out of their ass in terms of...
Sorry for the vulgarism, everybody.
And the visuals. That's a visual I don't want.
I'm sorry.
Are they again, trying to... why are they withdrawing dependence? Because they're afraid that Iran is going to take it out in the region, on U.S. facilities, on U.S. soft targets.
Hey, remember, during Trump's first term, the Iranians struck Abqaiq.
You think this is psychological, that they're taking them out?
One sec. Struck Abqaiq, which is an important oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia. One of the most important facilities. An enormous amount of traffic goes through there. In fact, there was a worry that it was going to spike prices up. The Trump administration, first term, did nothing. The Iranians were behind a strike that killed 2 civilians in the United Arab Emirates. The Trump administration did nothing. So the idea that there's some conflagration out there coming is rubbish. Number one. Number two, of course, you want to remove your dependents if they don't need to be there, and you're worried that something is going to happen. That's an abundance of caution. But there's also the possibility that they're signaling, right? They're signaling to the Iranians, you better be serious in these negotiations, because otherwise we're going to tell the Israelis, you know what? Go ahead. So I think there's a whole set of different possibilities.
I'm trying to figure out how to write about this, but since people are listening, I want you to, I think Americans that aren't very versed in Iran and, don't know a lot about the region would say, okay, Iran, what's the real threat to America with Iran? Is it a nuclear weapon? Or is it, kind of this other activity where they could, is it terrorism? Is it all the proxies? Because they think like, yes, Israel has and I've heard this from people that, want to know like, why should I care about Israel and Iran? Because the existential threat of a nuclear weapon isn't to me, it's to Israel. And maybe I do want to make a nuclear deal with Iran.
I
Go.
don't think there's anything wrong with the idea that we should negotiate with the Iranians. I think the problem is that we have to recognize that there's no deal the Iranians are going to make that's going to satisfy the requirement that they don't have a pathway to a nuclear weapon. And, without getting in the weeds, let's talk a little bit about this. Until 9/11, Iran was responsible for the death of more Americans than any other terrorist group. They're working on getting their numbers back up again. They have missiles that can reach certainly Europe, which is why the Europeans are so concerned, but they're well on their way to a missile program that can reach the United States at this point. They've been advancing very aggressively since all of the constraints were taken off under Obama's JCPOA. Let's go further. The Iranians are the main engine and the technical support to the North Koreans, not simply for their nuclear program, where they conspired together, but also for their missile program. Do we care about the North Korean nuclear weapons program? I do. We have a lot of allies in that part of the world. The Iranians are now working with the Russians. In fact, if you look at the Russian drone strikes on Ukraine, what are they using? They're using Iranian-made drones. Again, do we care about that? Well, I don't know. I've heard you say you care about Ukraine.
I
care
do.
about
I'm just
Ukraine.
saying, I've heard
So
from.
I want to, but let me keep going, right?
Keep
The
going
new
for another
nature-
minute because we want to get to China too.
Yeah, but the nature of warfare has changed. And it is really important to understand that the cooperation that Iran has pioneered with the Houthis, who have managed to close off a passageway for through the Bab el Mandab of ships costing billions and billions and billions of dollars, is all thanks to Iranian technology. Now, the Iranians are not simply shipping missiles to the Houthis. They've given them the training and the factory necessary to actually build those missiles on their own. These are bad things. These are bad guys. And while I have very little desire to go to war with the Iranians for any number of reasons, the idea that we shouldn't strike them strategically and take out their centrifuges, their nuclear weapons research labs, and every other aspect of their program, to me, is crazy. Get it done before we can't do it anymore, like we can't with North Korea.
True.
China, you talk.
Okay, China. The US and China had this handshake agreement on basically returns the countries to the kind of status quo before the whole tariffs thing. Why? Um, this main thing is these rare earth minerals, okay? And so, people are like, rare earth minerals, what? A diamond, a ruby. Basically, every time you have your little phone right here, every time you turn on your car, every time you, a U.S. troops or whatever with fighter jets or whatever, all rare earth minerals. Not only does China corner the market on the minerals, but they have 90% of the processing of the minerals. And I think before President Trump opened this trade war with China on these tariffs, I think he forgot to remember that China has him over a barrel of rare earth minerals. And now, this is the core issue. It's the virtual monopoly of these minerals from cars to military deployment. And that's why the US had to ease some technology export controls. And we'll see what happens. Trump said the deal is done. The Chinese are like, meh,
The Chinese are like, maybe it's done for 6 months, is what they've said, just
Yeah,
in case
yeah.
Trump changes his mind. Look, you and I have talked about this on almost every one of our shows. And the bottom line about this is Trump has a bee in his bonnet. He loves tariffs and has not thought in any way about the
About how to
consequences.
strategically apply them.
Right. But it's not just how to strategically apply them. His entire rationale is economic nonsense, what George H.W. Bush would have called voodoo economics. He's got two people around him advising him on these questions inside the White House who are aiding and abetting this crank economics, and it is not helping us. You know, I am all for changing our relationship with the People's Republic of China. Mark and I had a podcast about what the PRC is doing at Stanford University that would, as my late boss used to say, curl your hair, right? It's terrible
It's a
what
great
they're doing.
podcast, everyone. You should listen to. This is about espionage at Stanford.
Right. This is about espionage. And this isn't about evil Chinese robots spying on their fellow students. This is about how the Chinese Communist Party compels Chinese students to spy for them and to report to them as in exchange for the safety of their families, in exchange for scholarships. And this is, I suspect, very widespread. I am all for a much harsher policy toward China. I am all for frankly, a trade divorce that we undertake slowly and intelligently. But this tariff crap is it's just crap. It's like going
Just
out
ass
and
backwards.
it
That's just
is.
like ass metaphor today, but
I
yeah.
know it's ass day. It's ass day at the gym. It's ass day on Substack. But listen, you and I agree entirely about this, and I would go further and say there are very few people who disagree with us, because again, if you were saying to yourself, okay, he loves tariffs, maybe that's dumb, but he has a purpose here, that would be amazing. I have no idea, and nor does anybody else. And this was the complaint of the EU. This was the complaint of our Asian friends. This is a complaint of the Australians. What do you want? Right? And the answer is, oh, I want inflation. I want a weak dollar. I want the stock
He
market
does
to
want a
go
weak
down.
dollar. That's like the problem.
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about that.
I know. I feel
World traveler that I am. But
yes.
anyway, yeah, look, it's all really frustrating, and Congress, is just not doing enough about it. Hey, let me flag something if I might, because it's really interesting, and you guys know, right? Elise is a proper journalist and an adult. I'm a think tank chick, and so I work with all these nerds. One of my colleagues, Nick Eberstadt, who I think is just, and I use this word very, very, very reservedly. He truly is brilliant,
Yeah. Yeah.
and brilliant demographer, and he has got a paper out on immigration that is hugely important. Mark and I had him on the podcast that we released this morning, and I've got a bunch of stuff from it coming out on Substack tomorrow morning. But really, it tells us so much about who these migrants are. I'll give you one stat, Elise, that I find fascinating, and that says a lot about our country today. If you dropped out of high school and you are what Nick calls an Anglo, basically you were born in America. If you dropped out of high school, your workforce participation is hovering around 50%, if not lower. If you are from the New World, Central America, South America, you came across that border and you are working, but you didn't go to high school, and that is the vast mass of these people, right? Probably close to 2/3 have not actually finished high school. Your workforce participation is the same as an American college graduate, right? These guys work hard. All of these things are super interesting and really enhance our understanding of what's going on in this country, and should be part of the conversation, rather than, did he arrest a rapist at Home
Right. And I
Depot?
mean, also, look, successive presidents have tried and failed to pass some meaningful, immigration reform,
Not
acknowledging
really.
exactly what you said, which is, a lot of these migrants do contribute to the workforce. They work hard. They pay taxes a lot. Not all of them, but a lot of them pay taxes. And there needs to be, and look, Mr. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, National Archivist, blah, blah, blah. was in favor of, he at one point, I can't remember how far ago before he ran for president, certainly, was in favor of some kind of pathway to citizenship, was in favor of some meaningful immigration
Meaningful change.
reform. So
Right.
it's about what back to the my brand is crisis.
Mm.
Yes, there are criminal illegal aliens. Some of them are criminals. They're rapists. They're murder. Yes. However, to make it like we're having an invasion of a foreign army and using the 1780s legislation to deal with it in that way, I think the president would be better served by getting a smart group of people. I don't know that many in the administration right now, but on a working with Congress on in a bipartisan fashion on some kind of joint, you know,
No.
whatever, just like he should have done with economic reform,
Right. But hang on a
with
second.
with
Hang on a
government
sec.
reform.
Hang on a sec. Here's an unfortunate fact because Mark and I had exactly this conversation right in the outro of our podcast. One of the byproducts of the, you can call it an invasion. You don't have to call it an invasion. You can call it
It's
whatever you
not an
want. But
invasion. Give me a break. It's not.
4 million illegal aliens crossed the border and came into the country during the Biden
Invasion
presidency. Hey,
suggests that it's an organized thing where they're going after Americans. And
stop ranting. Hang on. Um, hang on. The rhetoric is you cannot like the rhetoric, and other people can like the rhetoric. That is not illuminating. One
It's
thing
not
is
about liking the rhetoric or not. It's creating a situation based on rhetoric. You're
no,
calling
4
them an
million people
invasion.
are not rhetoric, Elise. 4 million illegal aliens in our country in 4 years is not rhetoric. This
You
is a
just said
country
that
of laws.
50% of them are contributing to the workforce.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. No, that's 50% overall of all illegals. Hang on a second. But I'm trying to say something important here, which I think is vital for people to understand. You may think it's great that 4 million people came in across and not call it an invasion. You may think it's a terrible thing. I do. But what you need to understand is that it has devastated support in this country for legal immigration.
That's
And Nick goes through the numbers, and that is something to understand and something we need to think about as people who really believe in legal immigration. I addressed that very briefly in the Substack, but just as a sort of a really somber note here, because too much of this conversation is about rhetoric and not about facts. If you want to see a pathway to citizenship, if you want to see this problem solved, if you believe that immigrants contribute so much to this country, which I do with all my heart, and you want immigrants to come in a lawful way and be accepted in a mindful way by the American people, then what you want is you want support for immigration in this country. And at the beginning of the 20th century, support for migration to this country collapsed. World War I ended it, and it didn't recover until the 1970s. We are back now at the numbers that we were at the beginning of the 20th century, and that requires a national conversation that isn't going to be led by Donald Trump. It isn't going to be led by Gavin Newsom and his new political position of the hour. It needs to be led by somebody responsible, and I have no idea who the hell that is.
Well, I mean, on that note, and we're pushing past our time.
We are.
If you have questions about immigration, please check out, as Danny said, please check out the AEI website and Nick Eberstadt's work. I'm going to do that because I want to educate myself more.
And because it's my birthday and you want to do something nice for me.
I do.
And by the way,
seriously,
can we
send
just
us
say
your
one last
questions on
thing?
immigration. This is not maybe we'll do a special issue on it. We can bring in some other people, and we can, in the lack of having a national conversation with our leaders, we can start, that's the great thing about Substack. That's what it's for, to have these conversations amongst each other and with love and respect, Danny.
Love and respect, and a little bit of ranting and some interruptions. And a last beautiful note, which is, doesn't Elise look fantastic today? I love the green. Your hair looks perfect. And we're two women.
Go
We can
on.
say something nice about each other. You look amazing. Everybody, take care. See you
Thank
next week.
you. Happy birthday, Danny. Have a great
Thank
time
you again for
tonight.
my present.
And tune in tomorrow for Danny's Danny.
Oh,
It'll
for
be on
Danny's
her
Danny recipe.
it'll be
And
on notes. All right, everybody.
ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Ciao.